What does an average day look like for you? Maybe you wake up to your alarm at 8 a.m., reaching for your tablet to check out a new game or app. Later, you pull yourself out of bed, brush your teeth, and head to the kitchen for a delicious breakfast. You get your books and your computer ready and start your homeschool day, studying subjects like math, English, history, science, and maybe even taking a break to play your favorite sport or instrument. But what if, instead of waking up today, you woke up as a child in a city in the early 1900s? Maybe you'd wake up to the sound of a streetcar rolling by, or the factory whistle instead of an alarm clock, rising long before the sun does, around 4:30 a.m. You don't have a tablet to check, but you might have chores to do before you leave for work, scrubbing laundry by hand, or helping your family prepare a quick and simple breakfast. Then, instead of cozying up with a good book or firing up your computer for homeschooling, you'd head to the factory where you work. You'd be at your post by 6 a.m., operating heavy machinery or doing hard manual labor. Throughout this video, we'll continue our journey as a child in the early 1900s as we unravel the significant reform movements that took place during the Progressive Era. In our last lesson, we learn about muckrakers, journalists who use the power of their words to highlight the issues of their time, helping to ignite what we now call the Progressive Era. This was a time of huge change, a time when people banded together to fight against the harsh realities that were created or exposed during the Industrial Revolution. But what exactly were these reforms? What changes did they bring? And what is their lasting legacy today? We'll explore these questions by diving into the stories of two important and intertwined social reforms that took place during this era: the child labor and education reform movements. By the end of today, you will be able to explain the child labor reform movement and why it was important, and analyze the goals of education reform and its impact on education in the United States. Let's return to our day as a young person at the beginning of the Progressive Era. As you enter the factory, the noise is overwhelming. Machines are clanking, whirring, and hissing all around you. The air is thick with dust and it's hard to breathe. Your workday has barely started and already you're tired and your eyes sting. There's no school for you today, no time to study math or read a good book. Your job is to work, helping to produce the goods that the growing nation needs. You stand for hours, operating machinery or assembling products. The work is dangerous. There's no safety equipment, and you've seen several friends get hurt on the job. There are no breaks to play your favorite sport or to practice your instrument. Your only break is a short lunch for a homemade sandwich, and then it's back to work until the factory whistle signals the end of the day, which comes well after the sun has set. I want you to take a moment and think about what it would feel like if you had to give up your schooling, your sports, your hobbies, to work in a factory all day. How different would your life be? But as bleak as this sounds, change was on the horizon. People began to realize that this was not the way childhood should be. They argued that children should be in school, learning and growing, not laboring in factories. These people began protesting and putting pressure on their political representatives for change. A major victory in the fight against child labor was the Keating-Owen Act of 1916. This law made it illegal for products made by child labor to be sold between states. This was an important step towards getting children out of factories. Because of this act, businesses had a financial incentive to stop employing children. No child labor meant they could continue to sell their products across state lines. However, it's also important to note that the Keating-Owen Act was later repealed or canceled because the Supreme Court found it unconstitutional. Pause here to answer the question, how do you think the Keating-Owen Act could still be important or influential even if it was repealed? Even though it was short-lived, this law was significant. It showed a shift in the way society viewed childhood and work. It paved the way for future reforms, moving us closer to the world we live in today, where children are given the time and space to learn, grow, and just be kids. Pretty different from a day in a factory, right? In our next segment, we'll look at another crucial reform in the progressive era, the idea of public education. Take a moment to think about our day so far. We've gotten up at 4:30 a.m., done chores, gone to work at the factory with little to no breaks, and gotten home after dark. You also might remember from previous lessons that people weren't paid very well for all this hard work in the factory. While you live close to many factories, there is only one school that is within walking distance from your small apartment, and it is very expensive to attend. So not only did most children not have time for school, many families couldn't afford it. The progressive era was a time of immense change, and one of the biggest areas of reform was education. During this time, many reformers believed that education was the key to addressing some of society's greatest problems. They argued that if children were educated, they could grow up to be informed citizens and could contribute positively to society. So what did these reformers do? Well, they pushed for compulsory education, which means laws that require children, no matter their background or social status, to go to school for a certain number of years. While the first public schools were created over 100 years before the progressive era, not many students were able to actually attend them. Yet, thanks to the education reform movement, attending school through at least elementary school became a legal requirement. By requiring children to be in school during the day, these laws indirectly helped end the reliance on child labor in major factories. Essentially, if children were occupied with learning, they couldn't be working in dangerous environments. But remember, schools in your area were really expensive, so how were you going to follow the law? Well, it was during this time that the idea of free public schools for all children, rich or poor, started to become a reality. Pause here to reflect on the questions. Can you imagine a world where only certain kids were allowed to go to school based on how much money your parents made? What kind of impact do you think that would have on society? Reformers in the progressive era understood the importance of education for all, and that's why they fought to establish public schools. These schools would eventually be free and accessible to all children. This was important because public schooling was not just about reading, writing, and math. It was about helping to create a society where everyone, no matter their family's background or financial status, had at least some chance to succeed. The education reforms of the progressive era have had a lasting impact on how we learn today. So the next time you are reluctant to log on to study science or work math problems, think about the opportunities that you now have that didn't exist for many children just a little over a century ago. Oh, well, we made it home from our long day as a child in the progressive era. Take a moment to reflect on how our day in the early 1900s compared to what an average day looks like in the modern world. What lasting impacts from these reform movements can you still see in your life today? We'll take a look at another important social reform movement from this era in our PDF, the fight to gain the right to vote for women. Be sure to join us for our next lesson when we examine this particularly interesting president who had a big impact on this era, Teddy Roosevelt. And remember, Shaping the future begins with understanding the past.
Hey, hey.